It is the Temple of Jerusalem, and it was Herod's idea. The temple was hailed by many at the time as the most beautiful building in the world. It was a very public attempt by Herod to win the hearts and minds of the Jewish people.
Now, because there could only be in Judaism one temple building, the one in Jerusalem, therefore, by definition, that was, of course, a very important building because the entire Jewish religion was centered around that single building. We do know that it was a very large and magnificent building with marble and gold, and that it was surrounded by its own courtyard with towers and fortification walls.
$18,000 workers were employed, and more money was lavished on the temple than on any other building in the history of Judea.
We're told in one of the Jewish sources that God so favored this project that it only rained at night during the years of the building of the temple, but every day was a sunny, dry day so that the project could proceed unhindered.
During the construction work, Herod took great care to show respect for Jewish sensibilities.
On the human front, it was important that the temple not be defiled during the time of the rebuilding. And in order to get around that, Herod had priests trained in all the relevant building technologies as masons, as carpenters, and so on. There's no question that Herod rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem in order to solidify his reputation with the Jewish people.
With such public devotion to the Jewish faith, Herod should have won the approval of his people. But despite everything he tried, Josephus says that many still despised him. The roots of this hatred are not hard to trace. Although Herod was king of the Jews, he had been appointed by an occupying power, the Romans. And to make things worse, he pandered to them at every opportunity. In his next building project, Herod took a step that caused great offense to the Jewish population and swept away any remaining traces of goodwill. Herod's new project lies 60 miles northwest of Jerusalem and was once known as the Jewel of the Mediterranean. It is an entire city and seaport. This aqueduct, which supplied fresh water, is one of the best preserved structures. But in naming the city, Herod delivered the highest insult to his Jewish population. He named it Caesarea, in honor of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. Its amphitheaters and arenas were packed with Roman entertainments despised by Jews as decadent and immoral.
Herod's hippodrome in Caesarea was for horse races, perhaps chariot races, but also could be used for gladiatorial games, battles with animals, between humans, those kinds of bloody spectacles. This was the bloody underside of Roman civilization.
Then Herod committed the unforgivable. He built a temple, not to the god of the Jews, but to a Roman god, the emperor. He even funded a vast harbor with proceeds from Jewish taxes. Little of it survives today, but from the air it's still possible to make out the foundations of this sophisticated piece of engineering. Architect Christopher Brandon has been carrying out underwater archaeology that is revealing the true scale of Herod's harbour.
What you first see is basically a reef. You think it's just a natural reef. And then you start to see beam impressions, post holes, and you start to realize that this is not a natural feature. This is a man-made structure.
Herod used a revolutionary building technique that had just been invented by the Romans.
Herod constructed this harbour by floating out wooden boxes which were sunk in a line by filling them with concrete. All it was is an enclosing wall which was always filled with water. So the concrete was poured into the water and set within the water. They formed a solid foundation on which he could then build the rest of the piers that actually formed the harbour itself.
In the final analysis, Herod's sympathies lay with the Romans. No wonder Jews challenged the legitimacy of his kingship. No wonder he felt insecure. It would certainly give him a motive for murdering the children of Bethlehem. But was Herod actually capable of such a barbaric crime? The first indication of just how far he would go came when he was 38 years old. In 35 BC, Herod appointed a new high priest at the temple in Jerusalem. The high priest was second in power only to the king. Under pressure from his wife Mariamne and from her mother, Herod appointed his brother-in-law, the 17-year-old Aristobulus. But Herod worried that powerful Jewish families might form an alliance against him and back Aristobulus, a full-blooded Jew, as king. Then, at a party at Herod's palace, Aristobulus was mysteriously drowned. Few believed that it was an accident, and Josephus was convinced that Herod had had the young man drowned.
Here we find Herod ordering the drowning of Mariamne's brother Aristobulus. And this tells us first that Herod's paranoid, and secondly that he's capable of murder, even though the evidence is rather circumstantial.
The evidence would hardly stand up in a court of law, but there was worse to come. Five years later, Rome had a new ruler. Octavian had defeated Mark Antony. Herod immediately switched his allegiance from Mark Antony and went to pledge his loyalty